My name is Daniel, and for most of my life, the sky was my second home. I had spent thousands of hours in the cockpit, logging flight after flight, guiding aircraft through clear skies and turbulent storms alike. Flying was more than just a job, it was part of who I was. I had trained for every possible scenario, studied every emergency procedure, and faced moments in the air that had tested my skills and composure. There were times I had felt the grip of fear creeping in, but I had always handled it, always found a way to bring my crew and passengers safely back to the ground. I thought I had seen it all until that flight. It was supposed to be routine, a short-haul flight, nothing out of the ordinary the kind pilots barely think twice about. The weather was clear, visibility was good, and our pre-flight checks showed no issues. As I settled into the cockpit, adjusting my headset and running through the checklist with my co-pilot, everything felt normal. The comforting rhythm of procedure, the familiar hum of the engines coming to life, this was my world, the one I had mastered. Takeoff was smooth. We climbed steadily, breaking through the scattered clouds, the city shrinking below us as we leveled off at cruising altitude. I glanced at my instruments, noting the numbers that had become second nature to me over the years. Airspeed steady, fuel levels good, no warning lights. Nothing seemed out of place. My co-pilot and I exchanged a few words, relaxed but professional, as we monitored the flight's progress. I even allowed myself a rare moment to glance out at the horizon, appreciating the sheer vastness of the sky. Then, the first sign of trouble came. It was subtle at first, a flicker on one of the instrument panels, a quick flash of red before it disappeared. I frowned, reaching forward to check, but before I could react, another alert appeared. Then another. Within seconds, the cockpit that had been calm and controlled just moments ago was suddenly alive with alarms. "Hydraulics are failing," my co-pilot said, her voice tight, controlled but not panicked. We were both trained for moments like this. System failures happened. That's why we had checklists, why we drilled emergency procedures over and over. But something about this felt different. The alerts weren't stopping. They were spreading across the dashboard like wildfire. "Confirmed status," I said, already flipping switches, trying to isolate the problem. But before we could diagnose what was happening, the plane shuddered. It wasn't turbulence, not the kind you ride out with a steady hand on the controls. This was something deeper, a sudden shift in the aircraft's balance that sent a jolt through my seat. Then, the power flickered. For a brief second, everything went dark. The hum of the engines, the steady feedback from our instruments, the reassuring glow of our navigation panels, it all vanished, plunging us into a silence that sent a chill through my spine. A second later, the emergency power kicked in and the system stuttered back to life. But something was very, very wrong. "We're losing altitude," my co-pilot said, and I could hear the edge in his voice now. I looked at the altimeter. We were dropping fast. I grabbed the controls, trying to stabilize the descent, but they felt sluggish, heavy, unresponsive. The plane wasn't reacting the way it should. This wasn't a standard failure, not something that a simple reroute or manual override could fix. Something was pulling us down. "Mayday! Mayday!" I called out over the radio, my voice steady, but inside, a cold realization was setting in. "We are experiencing critical system failure, requesting immediate emergency landing." The ground control operator responded, but their voice was distant, a blur beneath the noise filling the cockpit. The alarms wouldn't stop. The altitude kept dropping. The horizon outside the window was tilting. I had always believed in control, in skill, in training. But in that moment, as the aircraft spiraled toward the earth below, I felt something I had never allowed myself to feel in the cockpit before: helplessness. The ground was rushing up too fast. My hands worked instinctively, trying to stabilize, trying to level out, but I knew we weren't going to make it. In the chaos, everything went black. I felt nothing, no pain, no weight, no sense of time. Just an eerie stillness, as if everything I had ever known had been stripped away in an instant. I expected darkness, maybe a void, or perhaps nothing at all. But I was still there. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. I could hear distant sounds, muffled voices, sirens wailing, the crackling of flames. Then, As if my vision was adjusting to something new, the world around me sharpened. I saw the wreckage. The plane, what was left of it, was twisted metal and debris scattered across the ground. Smoke curled into the sky, thick and black, rising from the shattered fuselage. Pieces of the aircraft lay strewn in every direction, some parts barely recognizable. The emergency lights from the rescue vehicles cast an eerie glow over the scene. People were running, shouting, searching. Then I saw my body. It was lying among the wreckage, twisted and broken in ways that should have sent a surge of pain through me. But I felt nothing. I watched as paramedics rushed toward me, as they shouted things I couldn't hear, as their hands moved quickly, working desperately to bring life back into something that no longer seemed connected to me. I should have been terrified. I should have been panicking, trying to wake up, trying to move. But instead, I just floated there detached, watching it all unfold. It was like watching a movie where I was both the main character and a spectator at the same time. Then, something else caught my attention, a shift, a pull. It was subtle at first, like the feeling of being gently nudged by an invisible hand. Then, it grew stronger. I felt myself being drawn away from the wreckage, away from the sounds of sirens and shouts, away from the world I had always known. I tried to resist. I didn't want to leave, didn't want to drift into whatever unknown force was pulling at me. But there was no stopping it. It was stronger than gravity, stronger than anything I had ever experienced before. Then, I saw a tunnel. It wasn't made of stone or metal, not something physical or earthly. It was light itself, stretching endlessly ahead of me, glowing with a radiance I had never seen before. The moment I saw it, a strange mix of emotions filled me: fear, awe, curiosity, peace. It was as if every part of me knew what this was, even though my mind had never prepared for something like it. The pull became irresistible, and I was drawn into the tunnel. The moment I crossed its threshold, the world behind me, the wreckage, the chaos, my own broken body faded into the distance. I felt weightless, like I was moving but not under my own power. The light around me wasn't just something I could see, it was something I could feel. It was warm, but not like heat. It was calming, but not in a way I could describe. It was as if I had been wrapped in something greater than myself, something that knew me, saw me, and yet didn't judge me. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what was waiting for me at the end of this tunnel. But I wasn't prepared for who I met. I moved forward without walking. There was no ground beneath me, no force propelling me, yet I was being carried deeper into the endless tunnel of light. The sensation was unlike anything I'd ever known, completely weightless, yet not floating. I wasn't afraid, though part of me felt like I should be. I was outside of everything I had ever known, far beyond the reality of life on Earth. There was no cockpit, no instruments to rely on, no safety procedures to fall back on. I had no control. The light ahead grew brighter, intensifying in a way that should have blinded me, but somehow I could still see, not with my eyes, but with something deeper. The warmth surrounding me grew stronger, wrapping around me like an embrace, not just physical warmth, but something that reached inside, touching parts of me I hadn't known existed. Then I saw him. The figure stood before me, radiant, unlike anything I had ever imagined. It was light, yet it had form. I couldn't make out every detail, yet I saw him clearly. His presence was overpowering, not in a way that inspired fear, but in a way that left no room for doubt. I had never considered myself a religious man. Sure, I had believed in something, some higher power, some force beyond human understanding, but I had never committed to one faith, never truly thought about what came after death. And yet, standing in front of me now, I knew. It was Jesus. The moment I realized it, something inside me broke open. It was as if my soul had been locked in a cage I hadn't even known existed, and now, for the first time, I was free. Love that was the only way to describe what I felt. Not just any love, but a love so pure, so overwhelming, that it filled every empty space within me. It was a love that had always been there, always waiting for me, even when I hadn't been looking for it, even when I had ignored it, even when I had chosen my own way, my own path. I couldn't speak. My thoughts, my doubts, my fears, none of it mattered anymore. Then he spoke. Daniel. The sound of my name from his lips sent a shockwave through me. It wasn't just hearing my name. It was being known completely, deeply, more than I had ever known myself. You are here because it is not your time, Jesus said, his voice steady, filled with authority, yet with an immeasurable kindness. I still couldn't find the words to respond. My mind tried to catch up, tried to grasp what was happening, but my soul already understood. Jesus stepped closer. I should have collapsed to my knees, but he held me up, not with his hands, with his presence. There is something you must see, he continued. You have a mission to fulfill. I stood before him, unable to move, unable to think beyond the overwhelming presence that surrounded me. It was as if every part of me, my past, my thoughts, my very existence, had been laid bare before him. There were no secrets here, no walls to hide behind, no carefully crafted persona to maintain. I was fully seen, and yet, in that moment, I felt no shame, no condemnation, only love. A love so deep and pure that it was almost unbearable. Then, the light around us shifted, and suddenly, I was no longer standing in front of Jesus. I was moving again, carried without effort, weightless yet fully aware. The space around me stretched, transformed, and then I saw my own life unfold before me. It wasn't like watching old home videos or flipping through memories in my mind. It was real. I was there, reliving moments from my past, but this time I saw them differently. I saw myself as a young boy, standing in my childhood bedroom, staring out the window at the planes flying overhead. I remembered the excitement, the longing to be up there, to touch the sky. But now I saw something I had never noticed before. I wasn't alone. I saw my mother, watching from the doorway, smiling softly, but with something deeper in her eyes, a silent prayer for me, a hope that I would find my purpose. Then the scene shifted again. I was a teenager, sitting on my bed with my head in my hands, the weight of a recent failure pressing down on me. I had let someone down, a friend, a teacher. I couldn't remember exactly who, but I had convinced myself that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't meant to do great things. And then I saw it. Jesus had been there, not physically, but his presence had surrounded me, waiting for me to look up, to reach for him. But I never did. Scene after scene unfolded before me, times when I had doubted myself, times when I had let fear keep me from stepping into something greater. But there were also moments I had never considered important before, small acts of kindness, words spoken in passing, choices I had made without a second thought. And I saw how each one had rippled outward, affecting others in ways I had never imagined. I watched as a moment of encouragement I had given to a fellow pilot on the verge of quitting had led to him persevering in his career, a career where he would one day save lives in an emergency landing. I saw how taking the time to comfort a grieving friend had given them the strength to push forward, to keep going when they were on the brink of giving up. Everything was connected. Tears welled in my eyes as I realized the truth. I had never been insignificant. None of us had. Every action, every word, every decision had meaning. I had spent so much of my life focused on my own path, my own ambitions, that I had failed to see the bigger picture. And then the scene stopped. I was back in the presence of Jesus. His eyes were filled with a love I could barely comprehend, but there was also expectation. You were made for more than this, he said. The weight of his words settled deep within me. I had been given so much, a life, opportunities, moments that I had taken for granted. And now I had a choice. I could embrace this purpose, step into the mission that had been waiting for me all along, or I could let it slip away, returning to a life of missed moments and unrealized potential. The moment stretched before me, heavy with meaning. I stood in the presence of Jesus, the warmth of his light surrounding me, but my heart was racing. The truth he had shown me was undeniable. My life mattered more than I had ever realized. Every choice, every word, every action carried a ripple effect that extended far beyond what I could see. And yet, I had spent so much of my time missing it, living as though only the immediate moment mattered. But now, something else was about to be revealed. Jesus lifted his hand slightly, and the light around me shifted once again. I felt myself being drawn forward, not forcefully, not against my will, but as though I was being invited to see something important. Then, the air around me shimmered, and suddenly, I was no longer standing before him. I saw the future. It wasn't just a vague impression or a dreamlike vision. It was real, playing out before my eyes, like I had been transported through time itself. And what I saw stunned me. At first, the path was bright. I saw myself waking up from this experience forever changed. I wasn't just going back to the life I had known, I was stepping into something greater. I saw myself speaking to others, sharing what I had seen, what I had learned, what I now knew beyond any doubt to be true. People listened. Some doubted, some pushed back, but others leaned in, their eyes widening as though something inside of them had always known there was more. I watched as small conversations led to life-changing realizations. I saw people who had been searching their entire lives suddenly find the truth they'd been longing for. I saw the burden of fear and doubt lift from them as they embraced Jesus' love. Some had been near the edge of despair, questioning their very existence. But one conversation, one moment of truth, changed everything. The ripples spread further. I saw a man who, after hearing my story, chose to reconcile with his estranged family instead of cutting them off forever. I saw a woman, once paralyzed by fear, finally step into the calling she had always resisted. I saw a young boy, inspired by what he heard, grow into a man who would one day lead thousands to Christ. I watched as the truth flowed outward, touching lives I had never even met. One life at a time, the world was being changed. Then, the vision shifted. The brightness faded. The warmth that had filled the air disappeared, and suddenly, I saw something else, the other path. I saw myself waking up in the hospital, just as before, but this time, something was different. I saw the same realization dawn in my eyes, the same knowledge, the same truth, but instead of stepping into it, I buried it. I told myself it was just a dream, just my brain playing tricks on me. I convinced myself that going back to my old life, to my routines, was easier than embracing something that would demand everything from me. And so, I said nothing. I watched as the weeks passed, as the fire inside of me dimmed. I saw myself return to the cockpit, return to the familiar patterns of life, return to the conversations that once felt comfortable, but now felt empty. I saw the people I had met in the first vision, the ones who had listened, the ones whose lives had changed. Except now, it was different. The man who had chosen to reconcile with his family never did. The bond was broken forever. The woman who had been on the brink of stepping into her purpose never took that step. She remained trapped in fear. And the young boy, the one who would have grown to lead thousands, never heard the truth. His life took a different course, one filled with pain and loss that could have been avoided. And all because I had stayed silent. The weight of it was suffocating. I had always believed that one person couldn't make a difference, that what I did or didn't do wouldn't really change the world. But now, I saw how wrong I had been. The vision faded and I knew what I had to do. A sudden force pulled at me, strong and unrelenting. The vision of the future, the two paths, the choices, the consequences began to dissolve before my eyes. The presence of Jesus remained steady, unwavering, yet I felt myself being drawn away. I didn't want to leave. Everything inside me resisted. After everything I had seen, everything I had felt, how could I return? Here, in this place, I had experienced a love and truth unlike anything on earth. Here, there was no fear, no confusion, no doubt. But even as I pleaded silently, I already knew the answer. My time here was not over. My mission was just beginning. The light around me blurred, fading into darkness. Then, a sound distant at first, then louder, sharper, overwhelming. Voices. Beeping. The murmur of movement. I gasped, my lungs burning as air rushed into them. I was back. Pain shot through my body, a stark contrast to the weightlessness I had felt before. My limbs felt heavy, my skin sensitive to even the lightest touch. I could feel everything again, the ache in my chest, the throbbing in my head, the tightness in my throat. But beyond all of that, there was something else, an awareness, a knowing deep within me that was stronger than the pain. I opened my eyes. Blurred figures hovered over me, their voices urgent yet filled with astonishment. White lights above me. The sterile smell of disinfectant in the air. I was in a hospital. He's awake. The voice came from somewhere close, excited, disbelieving. The room snapped into focus. Doctors, nurses, my family. Faces I knew, yet something about them felt distant, like I was seeing them through new eyes. One of the doctors leaned over me, shining a light into my pupils, checking my vitals. His expression was one of pure disbelief. This isn't possible, he muttered, shaking his head as he read the monitor beside my bed. What do you mean? Another voice asked my mother. I turned my head slightly, seeing her standing beside my bed, eyes filled with tears and relief. The doctor hesitated. He shouldn't be awake, he said finally. His injuries. He gestured at my chart, shaking his head again. We didn't think he was going to make it. I heard their words, but they barely registered, because I already knew the truth. I had been dead. I had left my body, crossed into something beyond this world, stood before Jesus himself. And now, I was back. My father stepped forward, gripping my arm tightly, as if afraid I would slip away again. His eyes, usually unreadable, were glassy with emotion. You survived, Daniel, he whispered. You survived? I swallowed, my throat dry, my heart pounding not from fear, but from the weight of what I now carried. Because I knew. I had been brought back for a reason. I couldn't ignore the mission entrusted to me. I had survived, but I was not the same man who had boarded that flight. Everything about me felt different, not just my body, which ached with every movement, but my mind, my soul. The world around me looked the same, but I saw it differently now. The sterile white walls of the hospital, the beeping monitors, the relieved faces of my family, they all seemed somehow distant, like echoes of a reality I had once belonged to but could no longer fully return to. At first, I struggled to put into words what had happened. How could I explain something so vast, so beyond anything I had ever known? How could I describe standing in front of Jesus, feeling his love, seeing the truth of my existence laid bare? Every time I opened my mouth to speak, the weight of it all made me hesitate. Would they even believe me? My family was overjoyed that I was alive. The doctors couldn't explain how I had survived, let alone how I had recovered as quickly as I did. But as the days passed, their relief turned to concern. I wasn't the same. The things that had once seemed important to me, my career, my status, my future plans felt insignificant now. My thoughts were consumed by the vision I had been given, by the message Jesus had entrusted me with. I couldn't go back to living the way I had before. I had a mission. So, I began to speak. At first, it was just to those closest to me, my family, my closest friends, the people who had come to visit me in the hospital. I told them everything: the crash, the moment I left my body, the tunnel of light, and then him. I told them how Jesus had called me by name, how he had shown me my past, my future, and the interconnectedness of all lives. I told them how he had given me a choice to return and fulfill a mission, or to let it slip away. The reactions were not what I had hoped for. Some listened, their faces soft with interest, but doubt flickered in their eyes. Some nodded along, clearly thinking I had imagined it, that the trauma of the crash had played tricks on my mind. Others were more direct. Daniel, you were in a coma for days, one of my closest friends said, shaking his head. Your brain probably just made sense of it all the best way it could. It sounds like a dream. My brother added, a powerful one, sure, but still just a dream. My father was more cautious. He didn't outright dismiss my experience, but I could tell he didn't fully believe it either. He looked at me like a man searching for something familiar for the son he had known before the crash. Maybe it was a sign, he said, as if trying to find some middle ground. Maybe it means something. But don't let it consume you. But how could I not? I had stood in the presence of Jesus himself. I had seen what truly mattered, what this life was all about. And yet, the people I loved the most, the people I thought would understand, didn't. It was painful, but it didn't stop me. Despite the skepticism, despite the quiet whispers when I walked into a room, I couldn't stay silent. Something inside me burned with urgency. I had been sent back for a reason. If I kept this experience to myself, if I let doubt and fear hold me back, I would be no better than the version of myself I had seen in that second vision, the man who wasted his second chance. So, I started reaching beyond my immediate circle. At first, I sought out others who had similar experiences, people who had survived near-death situations and returned with stories they couldn't explain. To my surprise, I found them. There were others, people from different walks of life, different faiths, different backgrounds, yet all of them had glimpsed something beyond this world. Some had seen the light, but hadn't known what to make of it. Others had felt an overwhelming presence of love, but had hesitated to call it Jesus. I listened. I shared my story with them, and in those conversations, something remarkable happened. Some of them began to see it too. Some had been on the fence about their faith, uncertain of what they believed. Others had been hardened skeptics, convinced that death was just the end. But after hearing what I had seen, after hearing about Jesus calling me by name, about the ripple effect of every life, about the mission he had given me, something in them shifted. It was small at first, questions, curiosity, quiet moments of reflection. But then, some of them, not all, but some, started seeking more. They started asking about Jesus. It was in those moments that I felt the deepest confirmation. This was why I had been sent back. So, I kept going. I spoke to anyone who would listen, friends, colleagues, even strangers. I sought out opportunities to share my story, even when I knew I would face ridicule. I volunteered in my community, speaking at recovery groups, hospitals, churches, even schools. Not everyone welcomed me. Some were polite but dismissive. Others were outright hostile. A few times, I was asked to leave. Not everyone was ready to listen. But some were. There were the ones who pulled me aside after I spoke, their voices low, their eyes filled with something between hesitation and hope. "Can we talk?" they would say. I don't know why, but something about your story made me think, tell me more. I met people at their lowest, people who had been struggling, searching for meaning, for hope, for something bigger than themselves. People who had lost faith, who had turned away from God, convinced that if he was real, he didn't care. I told them about the love I had felt in his presence, the kind of love that saw everything, the failures, the mistakes, the doubts, and still welcomed me with open arms. Some listened and walked away, unwilling to believe. But some stayed. Some asked more questions. Some wanted to know Jesus. Each day, the mission became clearer. But not everyone was ready to listen. The more I spoke, the more resistance I faced. At first, it was subtle, quiet dismissals, awkward silences when I shared my story, polite nods followed by quick subject changes. But as time went on, as I became bolder in sharing the truth of what I had seen, the opposition grew stronger. I lost friends. Some of the people I had once been closest to no longer wanted anything to do with me. They thought I had changed too much. They didn't recognize the man I had become, and maybe they didn't want to. I had been practical, logical, grounded in reason, a professional pilot, not someone who spoke about supernatural encounters with Jesus. To them, I had lost credibility. Some even mocked me behind my back. The whispers followed me at work. Some of my colleagues treated me differently, with skepticism, with unease. I could see it in their eyes, the way they avoided bringing up certain topics around me, the way they changed the subject whenever I started talking about faith. But then, the real consequences came. I was passed over for promotions. I had never had trouble moving up in my career before, but suddenly, opportunities that seemed within reach vanished. I knew why. I had become controversial. People didn't know what to do with me. Then came the warnings. A senior colleague, someone I had once considered a mentor, pulled me aside after a meeting one day. "Daniel," he said, his voice lowered as if he didn't want anyone to hear, "I'm telling you this as a friend. You need to stop talking about this stuff. You're making people uncomfortable." I stared at him. Uncomfortable? He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, I get it. You went through something intense, but people are starting to think you're... He hesitated, searching for the right word. Losing it. I let out a slow breath. I should have seen this coming. Maybe I did. But hearing it out loud, from someone I respected, cut deeper than I expected. They can think what they want, I finally said. But I know what I saw. His jaw tightened. I'm just saying. You have a career to think about. A future. I knew what he was really saying. I was risking everything. Still, I couldn't stop. I had stood before Jesus himself. I had felt his love, his truth. No amount of doubt, no amount of rejection could change what I had experienced. But the hardest loss came at home. My father, who had always been a steady presence in my life, grew distant. He never openly dismissed my experience, but I could see it in his eyes whenever I spoke about Jesus, the discomfort, the quiet disappointment. It was like he was watching a son he no longer understood. One night, over dinner, he finally said it. "Daniel," he said, setting down his fork, his tone carefully controlled, "you've always been a man of reason, a man of discipline. But lately," he exhaled heavily, "you've been acting like a completely different person." I met his gaze. "I am a different person." His lips pressed together. "You're throwing everything away for this." I shook my head. "I'm not throwing anything away. I've been given something more valuable than anything I had before." He didn't argue. He just looked at me like he didn't know me anymore. That was the last time we really talked. I had expected opposition from strangers. I hadn't expected it to come from the people I loved the most. It hurt. But through all of it, the rejection, the setbacks, the whispers, the distance, I held on to the moment I had stood before Jesus. I remembered his voice calling my name. I remembered the love I had felt in his presence, the truth he had shown me. I remembered the mission he had given me. And then, in the middle of the darkness, a glimmer of hope appeared. Looking back now, I see how much my life has changed, not just in what I do, but in who I am. The man I was before the crash, the one who lived by routine, who valued control above all else, who thought purpose was something you carved out for yourself, he no longer exists. The moment I stood before Jesus, the moment I felt his love, his truth, his presence, I was forever changed. That doesn't mean it's been easy. Far from it. Since I returned, I faced doubt, rejection, loss. Some of the people I thought would be there for me walked away. Some didn't outright dismiss me, but I saw it in their eyes, their belief that I was misguided, that I had let a near-death experience cloud my judgment. But none of that matters, because for every person who turned away, there was another who leaned in. For every time I was shut down, there was someone who whispered, "Tell me more." And for every person who doubted me, there was someone who finally saw what they had been searching for their whole lives. I used to think that what I did as a pilot was my greatest purpose, that guiding people through the sky, ensuring their safety, bringing them from one place to another, that was the highest calling I could have. But now, I realized that was just the surface. The real purpose, the one that had been waiting for me all along, wasn't just about guiding people through the air. It was about guiding them toward the truth. Not everyone will believe me. Not everyone is ready. And that's okay. Because the truth doesn't disappear just because people refuse to see it. And if you're still watching this, maybe, just maybe, you're meant to hear this today. You are here for a reason. That's not just something people say to make themselves feel better. It's the truth. I saw it with my own eyes. Every life, every choice, every moment, it all matters. I was given a glimpse of the ripple effect of our actions, of how even the smallest choices can change the course of someone else's life. I saw how a kind word at the right time, an act of love, a single moment of encouragement could change everything for someone else. And I also saw what happens when we don't step into our purpose, when we let fear keep us silent, when we let doubt convince us we don't matter. I saw the emptiness of a life spent ignoring the truth. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone. So, I'm here to tell you, your life matters. You are not here by accident. You are not just another name, another face, another person drifting through life without meaning. You were created for something greater. And maybe you already feel it. Maybe you've spent years searching for something more, for answers that no career, no success, no amount of money or status could ever give you. Maybe, deep down, you've always known there's something beyond what we can see. If that's you, listen. You don't have to keep searching. Jesus is real. His love is real. And He's waiting for you just like He was waiting for me. This isn't just my story. It's a call. A call to open your heart to the truth. A call to stop living in fear and step into the purpose you were created for. A call to understand that your life is not meaningless. Every moment you've lived has led you here to this very second, to this message. And now you have a choice. You can walk away, ignore it, tell yourself it's just another story. Or you can ask yourself, what if? What if everything I've said is true? What if Jesus is who He says He is? What if you are meant for more? What if this is your moment, the one you've been waiting for? If you're watching this, consider it a call to action. Don't ignore the pull inside of you. Don't let fear or doubt steal what could be the greatest truth of your life. Seek. Ask. Take the next step. Because I promise you, on the other side of that step, there is love beyond anything you've ever known. Embrace your mission, and together, we can make a difference.